Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube. I'm here to continue my read-along review for the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, written by Patrick McCrae. Episode 693. When Julia recruits a seductive occultist to exorcise Collinwood, will the vengeful spirit of Quentin Collins meet his match? Timothy Stokes, there David. Chris wrestles with leaving until Julia tells him about the haunting of Collinwood and David's possession. He is further shocked to learn that he may be a person of interest to the spirit. Meanwhile, Stokes manipulates David into confirming the haunting. He conducts an exorcism of the house as David screams for him not to and must be restrained. The professor seems triumphant. However, as Stokes maintains a, vi- a vigil that night, Quentin appears in the mirror and taunts him with his failure. Even though he's not in every scene, and even though the star of the episode is Professor Stokes, the real light, the real linchpin to 693 is Chris Jennings. Not so much for what he does, but for what he almost does, namely, get the hell out of Dodge. When Donald Briscoe's Jennings finds out that David is possessed, he's stunned. His stunned reaction is quietly authentic. In the jaded world of theater insiders, werewolves are not known for their muted representation of dramatic truth. But Jennings is really struck by how deep the situation runs. He's been a lichen for years. He's responsible for Sabrina's catatonia and hairstyle, sees pentagrams on foreheads. It's not a life devoid of the fantastic, and even he is thrown by this one. This is one of the few episodes of the horror series to contain actual horror rather than the mere symbols of horror. Chris has consigned his young sister to live in a house with a boy whose relatives believe to be possessed. Moreover, so does their and his doctor, and the doctor further believes that he is somehow important to the possession entity on a level she can't pin down. Maybe it's true, or maybe they've got a Wicker Man on the other side of the Widow's Hill. Either way, there is no safe option among the people you once thought were the only safe option. A werewolf is a monster, and because monsters are special effects, they are rarely legitimately scary. The horror factor in a werewolf movie has little to do with the werewolf. It's with the amnesia of the human within. As much as you fear for the safety of those around you, you're also grateful for them. They see what you can't. They can restrain or even destroy you when the time comes. They are the last line of defense when you go mad. But what if they end up being mad themselves? Worse yet, what if they don't? But just sound like it. As abstract as Chris is, he is still us when we started watching the series. He's an outsider to Collinsport. Unlike Chris, we've gotten used to the town. We're hard to shock as are the Collinses. It takes a real world surrogate to make us step back and appreciate just how jarring the situation is. Outside the house, Chris, a visitor, tries to leave. Within the house, another visitor, Quentin, is such an unwanted guest that the Collinses have to call an exterminator, Stokes. Never again will Stokes be given such an arc, largely because the defeat he suffers is humiliating on a level tantamount to his arrogance. Because of his charm, that's an easy fact to lose in the sandpile of 1,225 episodes. Fortunately, he doesn't take this crystal ball. He doesn't take his crystal ball and go home. He advises time travels himself. However, compared to the build up he's been given, Stokes never delivers like he tries to here, nor is he given the chance. Perhaps he doesn't even give himself the chance. Where is he at the final climax of a Leviathan arc? I don't recall. Where is he when Gerard reaches a fever pitch, allegedly out of the country? But if I learned that he just put on a fake mustache and waited the whole thing out at the Blue Well, I couldn't blame him. Under other circumstances, looking in the mirror and seeing David Selby staring back would be a delight, but not cackling madly. Stokes' first and last major defeat has been coming since we met him, and Gordon Russell's dynamic and gritty script both roots and elevates the professor as both all business and ne'er to do nothing but take care of same. He smokes like a noir detective. He roars at David after snapping a symbolic pencil of him, making himself more viscerally threatening than Quentin has ever been, and thus more of a match for the silent giant. Stokes lays traps but lays off the epigrams and witticisms, the Bond vivant mask discarded. At last, perhaps it was just a tool to bring him close enough to Collingwood to fight a danger he always knew was in residence. And then there's the exorcism, which has an immediate sense of emotional violence that defines horror. It's a perilously uncomfortable situation, and that's the kind of authentic fear I referenced. If it were merely Stokes conducting an uncharacteristically Abrahamic ceremony with his characteristic panache, the whole thing sorry, would just be TV. And if it were David writhing and screaming, I'd write it off as desperate bid for attention. 538 putting them together is a deeply unpleasant alchemy, and it makes Quentin vaguely more sympathetic. As nasty as Quentin has been, there's something unsettling yet necessary about seeing Stokes press David while deliberately withdrawing his warmth and sympathy to the point of humiliating him with a lie. By the time the exorcism happens, David's raving response has an immediate panic to it that seems a little too real. Is David afraid that Quentin will retaliate, or afraid that Quentin will once more leave him alone and defenseless amongst these increasingly angry adults? Either way, he seems like a victim of abuse from all sides, and his helpless, hapless agony during the ceremony blends with David's thunder to make this one of the show's most disturbing installments. Quentin's return, and by now our responses are a carefully programmed ambiguity. I mean, of course he's going to return. He's the next threat, and he has yet to say a word. And of course, it was too easy. While I like all red blooded Americans would be happy to watch an extended scene of David sitting in a chair, which was Warhol title, I think I also know that Selby is cosmically obligated to get him out of it. Stokes, nervously smoking away, has a seediness here. He's a man all too happy to terrorize a kid. Quentin, oddly triumphant in his resistance to Stokes, that his skills are meaningless. Could this be intentional on Russell's part for the short and long term planning of the show? Stokes must be defeated for us to more fully understand Quentin's powers and to catalyze Barnabas's trip into the past. But Quentin is our next hero, and by showing him taunting a character who was, at least in this episode, an occasionally self important bully who made a child scream, if for the best reasons, it's hard not to start liking him already. Maybe that's the real reason behind Quentin's laughter. Sometimes he's better than the people he taunts. This episode was broadcast February 19th, 1969. Episode 696. When Quentin claims Collingwood as his posthumous digs, why does Maggie need to be mind controlled for the closing? Quentin, David Selby. David has vanished from the old house. With only the phone he used to contact Quentin as the clue, Amy at Collingwood is again under Quentin's control and lures Maggie there. Barnabas is fearless in pursuit, where he finds Maggie again possessed by spirits from a past she never lived. Unless you're expecting a vampire, which is a pretty logical desire, this is what you're probably looking for if you're tuning into Dark Shadows for the first time. But you didn't get this episode. Let me guess. You wound up watching an episode about Jason Maguire lyrically alluding with criminal intent instead. You liked him well enough, and he made a good villain. But wasn't there supposed to be a monster or cousin in this one? Maybe a werebat musical number. Can David at least get a pet snake? No. How about some dash hounds? They're kind of creepy. Maybe it was an episode about Liz Stoddard. I bet she spent 20 minutes talking about how she was slowly going to die. And you're sitting there thinking, if this is what the show is like, I may beat you to the grave, even if I die of natural causes at a ripe old age. God forbid. It was a Worthington Hall episode. Is it the one where Charity is having second thoughts, or the one where Tim Shaw is quietly resentful? It pays to love such episodes. In the words of Emerson, if a man's measure of happiness is one of the many Adam episodes, then he is likely to die a blissful man. Seriously, finding peace with filler builds patience and character. 696, on the other hand, is pure entertainment. As I'm often fond of saying around these parts, it's a great episode to begin screening the series for someone. From the get-go, it grabs your attention, like few episodes, and we know by implication, and by having seen a show, any show, and thus innately understanding the rules of television fiction. Who are the heroes and what the problem is? Maggie is screaming for Barnabas that David is missing, and the fact that a weird antique phone has shown up as a curious calling card in the boys' bedroom is all of the evidence they need. Who is Barnabas? Who cares? He's the hero. Obviously. Who is Maggie? Again, who cares? She's invested in the well-being of someone else. There's only one place where the answer might reside: Collingwood. And in a bizarre inversion of the way the series begins, Collingwood is the haunted house, and the old house is the bastion of safety. Upon watching this, I have no doubt that Herb and Marilyn Shapiro of Tampa, Florida, to whom Collinsport realtors showed their ramshackle old house in 1965, are in a furious argument right now because, damn it, Herb, if she told you once, she told you a million times it's better to have the worst house in a good neighborhood, and you passed it up saying, well, it's no Collinwood. Let's look into some manufactured housing. And then Barnabas comes along, renovates it, and doesn't even have the decency to flip it. No, he's just going to live there and hold cosplay events, and given that he's intermittently a vampire, he's probably going to be for a century. It's probably going to be for a century or two. Then the rest of the episode is spent with Barnabas exploring Collinwood with Willie Loomis, and beyond being the title of his furniture series on the Learning Channel, that also gives this odd couple the chance to explore exactly what you want to see someone explore on a show called Dark Shadows, a haunted house. When the lights don't come on, Willie has misgivings, but Barnabas further establishes that he is the protagonist by claiming that they don't need lights. At that point, he whips out a flashlight with a beam so incredibly focused that it creates that crisply defined white circle on a dark wall, usually reserved for the animated opening credits of an Inspector Clouseau movie. There is a divine perfection to that moment, because it is not a response to glitch. It is the real deal from which all the latter glitches will spring. Barnabas then reassures Willie that they are safe because he doesn't sense the presence of spirits. Maybe Barnabas noticed that Roger cleaned out the bar before they evacuated, because Quentin's spirit is in full control of Collinwood, and his power may be spreading towards the old house. Of course, he hasn't managed to put the cable bill into his name. That's fine. But what's with all the pay-per-view wrestling special? Yeah, like that. All kidding aside, this is a rare moment when we see a villain in unchallenged control rather than just stirring the cauldron and implying a whole bunch. I suppose Quentin kind of has what he wants, but no matter how many times I see this stretch of the series, his obsession with killing David because he is heartbroken over Jameson is just weird. It's hard to remember because it may not make a lot of sense, and why does it take him so long? I suppose because he has to be released from the room first or something. But why should some wood paneling stop him when he can conjure music out of the air, appear and vanish at will, enslave another ghost, cause poison to materialize, and use the phone? No, he doesn't make any army of zombies rise as Will Gerard, but then again, he doesn't have to. I have I have long theorized that this is not the ghost of Quentin, that Quentin never died. Instead, it's another mask of Judah Zacher, and the so-called skeleton belongs to anyone. But what if the ghost of Quentin were waiting for someone to come along? Someone with some kind of edge, with time travel, someone who could help change the timeline. Perhaps the ghost intentionally tried some sort of spectral working from beyond the grave, and accidentally sent Victoria Winters back to 1795. Josette and Sarah may not be crazy about the past, but they are at least some kind of peace are at least some kind of peace at some kind of peace over it. Sorry. They are focused almost entirely on influencing the present. Quentin only seems to want to influence the present. Perhaps he knows that the right person can change the timeline and save him from his particular fate. Instead of giving advice and guidance to the living, he is hoping that one of the living can give advice and guidance to his 1897 self. Heightening Quentin's power and heightening the mystery surrounding it are essential tentpoles for Sam Hall to plant and raise as we are headed into the show's longest flashback. It's going to be nearly a year of wild adventure, and although nothing on the show perhaps compared to the indomitable evil and rousing adventure of the past body of episodes, nothing could prepare audiences for how he would deliver on that promise of installments like this. This episode hit the airwaves February 24th, 1969. 1897. Night has fallen over of the great house of Collinwood. This is simply the show at its finest. It is the best of the story thus far, retold with the full confidence of what they can accomplish. Barnabas leaps back in and threatens the death of its only heir in doing so. He meets a dashing and possibly wise scoundrel who makes Han Solo look like a Mormon. That's Quentin Collins. And his fall and rise will resemble what Barnabas has experienced himself. Can he save this caddish mirror? Gypsies, witches, returning fire demons, hypnotized assassins, yet more ghosts, music hall strumpets, religious hypocrites, a charismatic sorcerer, and Louis Edmonds' astounding mustache all stand in his way. Now, more than ever, the bat must soar to new heights. Episode 717. Can Rachel Drummond recruit Barnabas to confront the danger of the tower room before it consumes her? Barnabas, Jonathan Fred. Judith discovers that a madwoman named Jenny lives in the tower room. Rachel Drummond, sensing danger, goes to Barnabas for help. As their mutual attraction grows, he vows to investigate the strange happenings at Collinwood. The plane, and welcome to the Briar Patch traditional. This is the one where I am supposed to talk about Crazy Jenny and Marie Wallace's bold, uninhabited performance, because this episode really establishes the character beautifully. Not only do we see her at her nearly most histrionic, but we see a range in both Jenny and Wallace. Neither character nor actress is one note. And for such an extreme character, kicking off with what means to establish the potential for suspense anytime she is on screen. Indeed, Jenny is an authentic wild card, and we're never allowed to get ahead of her. Not only that, she is a poetic one. Her intelligence tells us scades about Quentin and his taste. Once we learn that she is his wife, and it makes her both a worthy opponent and a victim who's fallen from the highest of mental towers. Oh, and she has a musical number, which reveals a predictably rich voice for Wallace. A stage vet who never did featured singing in musicals, it's exactly the character debut you'd want. Both quintessentially Jenny, and teasingly unpredictable. But I don't want to talk about that, so you'll find no mention of it. Okay. The secret rock star of this episode is Barnabas, and the side of him we see emerging. He even has swagger to his melancholy. For all of the high stakes and tension of Mission 1897, he's having the time of his life. How much of this seems real to him? We are still in the pilot stages for Dark Shadows that is essentially its own spin-off. In 1897, the show distills and refines itself, and then reinvents the recipe for the clarified formula. It's not just Dark Shadows, it's Dark Shadows that knows it's Dark Shadows. What that means is that allows and does so without a lazy sense of privilege. The star, Barnabas, is getting the same rebooted treatment. Barnabas is like a successful nightclub act that's finally getting 2 shows nightly at Caesars and isn't wasting a moment. He has almost a giddy sense of confidence that redefines the character without erasing his essence. 1897 is the perfect place to bring out the best, and he has to be wondering why the hell he had to wake up in the day glow cereal box of post Camelot 1967 instead of here 1897, the future. Just enough advances for his native time to crackle with new wiring, which probably shocked Dirk Wilkins across the drawing room more than once when he installed it, and just enough proximity to his own era to still know how to dress for dinner and pen a decent thank you letter. Everyone is kind of a variation on what he already knows, but with a bit more transparency. And wait, here comes Maggie. I mean Josette. I mean Rachel. And by Rachel, I mean eventually Kitty. And by that, I mean Josette. Ah, to hell with it. It's Catherine Lee Scott. And we're darned glad to see her, too. And this character seems to be open to dating. He's got gypsies instead of Willie, and they're twice as wise and on a family level of untrustworthy, familiar level, sorry, of untrustworthy. Plus, they're superstitious, requiring him to waste less time making threats. They know the score. I was going to say that the downside is no Julia, but after a week or so without her, nagging, spying, moralizing, and guilting, I'll just say plus there's no Julia. She may be a friend, but as I said, he's on vacation. And instead of pretending he's on a secret mission, he really is on a secret mission. The worst that happens is that he gets stuck there. Oh, don't throw me in the briar patch and maybe the timeline gets changed a little bit. So what? Big deal. He was a tourist there too. He's got the old house, he's got Maggie, more than he ever had her before. He's got lackeys, and everyone enjoys a good poetic turn of phrase rather than just staring at him like they're going to beat him up in back of the blue whale and take his lunch money. But on what is basically his big date with Rachel, he is smoother than a caramel cognac. Excuse me. And the old dog knows it. It's like a Hammer production of James Bond. His scenes with Rachel have dialogue that's practically musical. There's nothing childish about attempted murder. here at Collingwood. Old hats don't die. They lie in wait for the innocent and the unexpected. Old hates, sorry. I've lived through danger before. No one is quite what they seem except me, of course. Such a lovely hand. Why would anyone want to harm you? Coroner than Kansas on the 4th of Cornier than Kansas on the 4th of July, and they work. Every syllable. Sincere, that's the secret. Rather than a nightmare of endless terror, it's Barnabas's ultimate dream, complete with kisses from the Josette character for his evil smashing bravado. It's a beautiful moment, and it underlines what 1897 is measuring. His fall with the Leviathans and long struggle to rebuild, which he does. The only thing missing are Mr. Rourke and Tattoo greeting Barnabas as he departs from a seaplane, next to Scatman, Carruthers, Steve Lawrence, and Marion Ross, explaining for the audience the fantasy he and the island staff are all about to fulfill. Come to think of it, it may be my fantasy too. This episode was broadcast March 25th, 1969. Episode 725. A lugubrious Lou breaks out at Collingwood when Quentin's a zombie, Jameson is Quentin, and Trask is back. Will Barnabas say aloha? Gregory Trask, Jerry Lacey. As Quentin continues to both inhabit Jameson's body and wither around in a graveyard, Gregory Trask arrives to recruit Jameson. He sets about conducting an excruciating exorcism as Barnabas looks on. Helpless to stop the craving clergyman, enter Gregory Trask. This is where the 1897 storyline kind of runs off the rails now and then, like the 1795 storyline. 1897 contains more filler upon actual viewings than in memory. Yes, Trask is a great villain, and there are volumes to say about Clan Trask, but that's counterbalanced by long patches of episodes to take up so much time. It makes me wonder if the character had dirt on Dan Curtis. But I'm obligated to like the Trask in their steadfastness as Colin's antagonist. I'm about a decade behind on my Big Finish listening, but have they done much with the Trask family per se? That's the parallel story to the Collins Chronicles. It's interesting to ponder the DS story from their perspective, a Lovecraftian hotbed of the aristocratic menace. Yeah, Greg, you gotta go see what's happening at that house. They walt up your Gramps, and where your dad disappeared. Well, okay, the other house on the estate. They have a vampire up there and a witch. That's fine, but around kids, Quentin's back. Carl's still dating showgirls. They're hiring all of your ex-employees. Oh, and Quentin's now in the kid's body. No, not like that. After he had the boy almost desecrate the corpse of Gabriel's old widow, all bets were off. Where's Quentin? He's a zombie. Maybe he has to do with all the gypsies they're harboring. Maybe it has to do with all the gypsies they're harboring. Yeah, it's a real normal house up there. Your dad built a mortuary out of nothing and did pro bono work as an attorney. Your granddad came to this godforsaken town. The Collins family was keeping occultists on the payroll, Maybe it was help the symbolic sailor they thought was a dandy marriage prospect. He was married, but did that matter to them? No. Hell, they were marrying off their sons to island girls that the uncle would sleep with on his own. Now, Greg, you're an educator and a pastor. They have two kids up there looked after by some trampy maid. Kids, Greg. Yeah, they're half gypsy. But let's let's let that go. Their mom. They locked her up in a tower because that's how they treat the sick. She's running around with a knife. And do they call the cops? Of course not. I say it's self-defense. You have to help that poor woman. Help the kids too. Inaccurate, but the truth usually is. Meanwhile, back in reality, Barnabas is having a hell of a night. Judith, the voice of reason, has Jameson locked up in the drawing room and screaming. She thinks odd about him being alone in a room with a grown man who keeps sticking his head out and saying, Not yet, give me just a few more minutes, before ducking back in for more terrified cries of fear and pain. Fortunately, Barnabas comes from an age of advanced and sophisticated corporal child rearing. If any character in literature is capable of dealing with the middle ground between modern common sense and old school birth branch pedigree, it's the man who did wonders with Willie Loomis by his instructive. God. Yeah, yeah, he beat the crap out of Willie. This is what makes Quentin look civilized. It's the fourth anniversary of the Daybook, written as my third week in Corona captivity begins. I got into all of this 8 years ago due to nearly 2 months of self imposed isolation as I watched all the dark shadows in just 2 weeks. If anything, this is all feels strangely familiar. My only advice, since you insisted, is to keep Dark Shadows on at all times. I mean, it. There are the much needed set of extra voices, rooms, and locations desperately required right now. They are home, and their home is ours. Be well. This episode was broadcast April 4th, 1969. Alright, guys, I'm going to stop right there for tonight. I'll see you guys tomorrow with some more read along of the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound. Good night.